All right, so welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today um, for this sort of overview review of the 2020 renewal project evaluation process for ODFC. I'm Christy Rubenstein with Diana T. Myers and Associates. We are consultants that work with ODFC on COC related projects, and this is one of them. So I'm just going to jump in and get going. So logistics for today's webinar, I asked please mute when not talking to cut down on background noise. Pam's on it in terms of when you enter, but if for some reason you unmute yourself to talk or something, just remember to mute yourself again. As I present, feel free to use the chat box to type in questions. And Pam's going to keep an eye on that, and I'm going to try to keep an eye on that as well. And if it's really pertinent to like something I just said, you need a clarification or something like that, I'll try to respond as we go along. We will have time at the end for Q&A in addition, so you can either type in questions or you can unmute yourself at that point to ask a question. Either is fine. So who is this webinar for? It is for agencies with COC funded projects, HTCs in particular, who typically are the ones completing the renewal project evaluation surveys. This is for you, but it's for any other agency staff who might be assisting in the process who want to better understand what it's about. What will we cover today? Sorry. These slides are just advancing. What will we cover today? We're going to talk about what's different in terms of the renewal project evaluation. We're going to do an overview of renewal projects, of the process, and what enhanced quarterly monitoring looks like, with really a focus on why we do it, what projects we look at, and what the COC evaluates through this process. And then we're going to touch base on the renewal evaluation surveys, just a brief overview of what the different surveys are for, and tips on data entry, and then just a review of some tables that tend to cause more problems. So what should you be able to do after today's session? Understand the renewal evaluation process for this year. Understand why it's important for this COC. I should add also for you, all of you. And be able to complete the renewal evaluation surveys. So renewal project evaluation, let's talk about what's different this year. Like many things, COVID-19 has really impacted the annual COC competition in that there hasn't been one. So that's a reflection of HUD acknowledging that many of you are doing a lot of work to respond to COVID-19. And so the HUD SNAPS office is really, which oversees the COC program, has really been since March, I think thinking about alternative ways to approach the COC competition this year and what that might look like. And so there has been no NOFA. That's what we know right now. That's usually how we submit renewal projects for renewal. And for those unfamiliar with the COC NOFA competition or application process, there are really two parts of that application. The first being an application that folks like Pam and I work on behalf of the entire COC, and it covers sort of the COC writ large, right? And then there's a second part, which is the priority list. And the priority list is how we submit all of the individual project applications for renewal. So none of that exists right now. In terms of there's no application, there's no priority list, there aren't renewal applications for you all to submit. The plan seems to be for there to be language inserted in a stimulus package in the future. And that language is in the House CARES Act. I think it might also be in the Senate's stimulus bill, but neither one is advanced or gone anywhere. So HUD's really been in this holding pattern on this because of probably like there was language written into the last appropriations bill, not the one before that would cover FY20, that really specified that they have to follow the FY18 or FY18 NOFA process. And so, so it's a little challenging, I'm sure, for them, and they're looking for what the alternatives are. What they would like to do is just auto renew all of the renewal applications, all the existing projects out there. They just want to auto renew those and advance them in that way. If they were to do that, if your project was on the 2020 GIW, which was released, and we checked that, and you all should be on there, then you would be auto renewed. So we'll just keep waiting to see what happens on this front. And we, like I said, we have not heard anything different lately. So what does it mean for you? We anticipate that there's no scoring or ranking of projects this year needed for a priority list. If HUD says we do need that, we will be using the data you submit through this process to go ahead and calculate those scores and figure out a ranking. So that's sort of the reason why we're doing it the way we're doing it. But we're going to remove that scoring and ranking part for now because we don't think we actually need to do that. Because the COC still is called upon through the interim rule to evaluate projects on an annual basis, we are going to do that through this, what I'm calling enhanced quarterly monitoring. Which is quarterly monitoring with some of the elements of the renewal evaluation added onto it. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But the basics of that are that we want to not just focus on the APR data and that kind of performance, but we want to look at some other aspects of your project's performance. And that's why we're adding those into what we're calling an enhanced quarterly monitoring. So again, it's going to look pretty similar to renewal project scoring of last year, but there are a few differences. We will use the FY19 COC renewal project scoring standards as our guide for evaluation, though we did not have an updated set of scoring standards for FY20 by the time like COVID really hit. So we'll be using the FY19 scoring standards. We're going to use surveys, and you all have received an email about those surveys already, to gather information very similar to what was done in FY19. We tweaked them in some ways, but they're quite similar to what was done last year. And you're going to provide things like your APR data, ELOCs, draws information, unit count data, policies and procedures, those kinds of things. Instead of releasing preliminary and final scores, we're going to use the data submitted to develop a project evaluation report that we'll then send to you, and we can have some conversation about if there are things on the report that are concerning or things that you think through the data we missed. We can do that. But that's our plan right now. Instead of, we typically in a scoring process will release a big spreadsheet, right, with everybody's scores and performance metrics. Instead, we're going to really do this on a project basis and send you a report. Since there's no scoring, we're not going to have an appeals process. So that part won't happen. If we did need to do scoring, we then have to think about that. We will host a meeting in December with all of you HTCs to review findings from the evaluation, general findings. We'll talk about some of our takeaways and then think about what comes next in terms of quarterly monitoring. We will need to, because the enhanced quarterly monitoring is focused on calendar year 19, the COC is already submitting data for FY20 for the LSAs, that's the longitudinal systems analysis data set. And the SPM submission will be coming up at the end of February. So we need to be working on getting our FY20 data in order, and we haven't really looked at that yet. So pretty soon after completing this, we'll jump into the next quarterly monitoring, which will be looking at probably the federal fiscal year 20 data. So just a heads up on that. So an overview of the enhanced quarterly monitoring and why it's important for the COC. And that's because everything you do in terms of data and entering data in HMIS is what all of that data, right, is what is used to inform the COC's system performance measures submission. If you're not familiar with the system performance measures, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to kind of do an overview of that if need be. In general, the system performance measures cover the entire system, but all of your individual projects and their related data are what it's made up of. So the better your projects perform, the better the COC performs, and the better the COC performs, the more points we get on the COC application. We actually took a lot of hits on the last application due to data outcomes that weren't great. And the COC lost a lot of points that way. So it's really important to us that we stay on top of the data, and we're doing some work to dig into that further. But the basis of that is for the project level data to be of high quality and accuracy. The better the COC scores on the NOFA, the more likely projects in what is called tier 2 are to get funded. And the more funding we get, the more households we can serve. So that's our sort of goal at the COC level, is always to bring in additional funding to serve more households. Why is it important for you? Well, quarterly monitoring is a way for you to become familiar with evaluation criteria and to better understand what those criteria are about, how we calculate them and why we use them, and how your data contributes to everybody else's performance. The first step really here is on the data quality, completeness, and accuracy side. It's really important that all of those things are looked at by you, that you're keeping on top of the data. And this particular quarterly monitoring, where we're doing this enhanced version, is opportunity for you to check in also on your policies and program practices to make sure you're aligned with HUD and COC policies, and where they're not, to maybe make some course corrections. So both on the data side, on the policy side, it's an opportunity to check in and make sure things are looking good. You can also assess your performance. So this is a great time to sort of look at your data, think about whether your outcomes are going to line up with what you think your project outcomes should be. You might feel like we're doing really great, but maybe the data shows you're not, and maybe some of that's just a data issue, but it might be a bigger program issue. So this is, again, a way for you to assess how your project's doing. And then to where it's not just a data issue, although those are important and should be corrected, if it's a more significant issue, to be thinking about, well, what do we need to work on for our project to make this project work better for the clients and the participants? How can we make changes? Do we need to reach out to the COC for more support and guidance? So which projects are evaluated? Only agencies that receive COC funding are participating in this process. And for those agencies, it's only your COC funded projects very specifically that we're looking at. The project types are the PSH, permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, and transitional housing project types. If the COC had a transitional housing to rapid rehousing project type, that would be folded into this, but we don't. So that's not on the list. I just wanted to make a note about the very large CT0301 rapid rehousing project. There are many different agencies participating in that project, and we're going to ask for each of you to submit your data separately. You all are set up as separate projects in HMIS, so that is possible for us to do. We'll look at the project as a whole, but we also want to look at the individual provider data as well. So what does the enhanced quarterly monitoring cover? Well, we're going to cover data quality, severity of need, performance, and then grant management. Now, usually in a normal quarterly monitoring, we would cover data quality, severity of need, performance up to utilization rate and grant management, but nothing beyond that. It would be APR driven, right? HMIS data driven. For this enhanced quarterly monitoring, we are going to cover the things that we would normally cover in a renewal evaluation, and that will include your ELOCs data, your APR submission, and then we'll get into agency compliance and participation, HUD priorities, FC CAN participation. A note about that one, we're going to be pulling that data and putting it into the reports. We can have conversations if you all think that's not accurate, and you can certainly look in your records and double check the data, but our plan is to go ahead and pull that from CAN records. We'll also look at cost effectiveness, and then for DV projects, we'll be looking at the client safety criteria, related measures, and then we'll also be looking for you to provide any HUD monitoring documents you might have. And then a reminder, we don't really necessarily have a penalty related to late submission this year, but late submissions of quarterly monitoring materials is typically included. You get points taken away for that in a regular renewal scoring process. So you'll want to get this in on time because it actually can impact your score in future years. All right, so let's talk about the surveys. There are 3 surveys that we're looking at using. And again, you've already received an email which lists the 3 surveys, but we have a data collection survey form. I'm not talking about these in any specific order, just how they strike me as the 1, 2, and 3. But the data collection survey form, this is the longest one, I believe, and pretty much everything on here is required for you to respond to. So you will use this to provide us with your APR data, your ELOCs data, your unit count information. And our suggestion, strong recommendation, is that you have your APR data. You've already run it, you've looked at it, you've checked it, you have that with you, you have your ELOCs draws info with you, you have your unit count info with you when you sit down to do this form. It'll make it go a lot quicker than sort of stopping and starting and sort of looking at your data and entering it and thinking that's not right and going back. So we suggest you do some of that work outside of the survey. And then just a note that you're going to have to actually submit copies, I won't get there, of your APR and ELOC stuff anyway. So having it already pulled and ready to go would be helpful. The renewal project summary form. So the difference for this form, this survey, is that unlike the other 2 where most of the responses are required, Most of the responses in this are not required, actually. It's optional, and many of the questions are really about information you may want to provide to us about your project and related to the specific criteria. So if there's something that you think, oh, well, I don't think I'm going to score well this year because I had this strange thing happen, or I'm still having a data problem with something, this is where you would enter that information. And that's going to just give us some insight into why you might have the outcomes that you have. And again, we're not scoring this year, so there's no appeal process. Some folks make use of this form, some do not and wait to tell us stuff through the appeal process, but there's no appeal process this year. So if there's anything you think we need to know, this is the form to use to tell us that. There are a few required fields in this form, so be sure you're not missing those. But anything that's not, that is optional and not required, you don't need to put in anything. You don't have to put in an NA or anything like that. You can just leave it blank. On the attachment uploads form, this is where the form that you're going to use to submit all the attachments that we request. Again, we suggest that you have most of this assembled and ready to go when you sit down to do it. And our big thing here really is to adhere to the naming conventions that we specify. So that really helps us track what you've submitted, and then to know when we're going to look at things, if we're looking at the right thing and we're not searching for the right document, which may have all kinds of interesting names. So please follow the naming convention, and where it specifies that it's only going to accept a certain file type, just be aware of that. So the forms and how the surveys and how they're laid out, each one has 3 pages. We really, this is where we made the most changes, just was the setup of the surveys. We have an opening page with instructions. Please read those. That's always helpful. And the second page with all questions are on there. So the second page is where you're filling in everything, and all the questions are really there. So instead of being broken up on many pages, it's all on one page, because we realized last year that when we had a lot of things required, you weren't able to advance to another page to work ahead or to work on something different. So this way you can jump around. Say you're in the data collection survey, you will be able to do your ELOC stuff first if you want, and then come back later and do the other pieces. You could do the unit count stuff first. So that should just be on just a logistical level for all of you, then easier to deal with. And you can also jump in there and just take a look at what the questions are. We also have a Word version of the surveys for you to look at, so you can scout out the questions ahead of time. And I'll touch base on that in a minute. Again, don't forget to click submit. You need to fill everything out and then click the submit button. That's the only way that your survey is going to be finalized. And then the third page is just a thank you page. You should, upon submission, receive an automatic email response with a copy of your survey results. And we highly suggest you keep that for your records. That's going to be your proof that I submitted this thing and I submitted it at this date and time. If you don't get that, please let me know. You can reach me through the ODFC Gmail account, and we'll make sure that you get a copy for your records. In terms of resources, I did some video guides, just quick walkthroughs. They're sort of in the 5 to 10 minute range. If anybody's unsure about the surveys, you've not done this before, or even if you have and you just want to hear me talk to you about it, feel free to go to the YouTube page and watch those video guides. They're pretty exciting, I have to say. No, they're not, but they will walk you through really what the survey is about, and give you some tips on how to make sure that you don't have any issues or errors cropping up. We also have a Dropbox folder where we've placed a bunch of resources for you. As I said before, there are Word document versions of each of the survey forms, and they're in this folder. So if you're looking to sort of scout out ahead, what are the questions? What are the documents I need to have? This is a good place to go. There's also an explainer for running your APR. Hopefully most of you know that, but sometimes things happen and you're stepping in to a role and doing this stuff when you didn't know you were going to be doing this stuff. So if you need just a basic reminder of how to run your APR, that is there. There are also tools available through CCH and Nutmeg for these things. So I just want to say that those also remain resources for you. The other thing that we have in there is a copy of the FY19 Renewal Project Scoring Standards. We have the APR table examples document where you can see each of the APR tables, the specific column, row, cell, right, that we're looking for you to input into the survey. All of that is in those table examples. Everyone is broken out, and the cells we need are highlighted in red. So that's a really useful tool if you're just not sure what we're asking for. And then there's the slide deck, the Enhanced Quarterly Monitoring Explainer slide deck, which is pretty much this presentation. This probably has a little bit more, and without me talking, obviously. And we'll add this slide deck as well. And then Pam is recording this webinar, so we'll figure out what the best way. It might be better to put on the YouTube page. It might be too big to put in the Dropbox folder, but we'll make sure that it's on somewhere for you guys to access if you need it. So some data entry tips. This might seem a little silly, and I'm going to say be sure you have run the APR for the correct time period and project, but I have to say, inevitably, I usually get one or two people who run the APR for the wrong time period. So please be sure that you run it for the correct time period. For this submission, that time period is the calendar year 19, so that's 1/1/19 to 12/31/19. So please be sure you do that. Review the data you enter and try to avoid typos and just errors. If you feel like your attention is wandering, you're getting interrupted a lot, consider taking a break, coming back to it later. That's better than trying to rush through it and making a lot of errors, or to just, kind of plow through, but you're just really distracted. If you have a 0 for a data point, go ahead and enter a 0 into the tables. Pretty much all of them are looking for all the cells. This is within the survey tools to be filled in. So if you leave it blank because you think, well, it's blank for me, it's or 0, I don't need to fill it in, it's highly likely when you go to submit, you'll get an error message. So go ahead and fill in those zeros. The save and continue later function is working. Yay, they fixed that. So just be mindful if you go to use it that it's not a one-time thing where I save it and then it's always going to take me to the latest version. No, you will need to fill that little formlet out to save and continue later every time you go to leave your survey and you want to be able to access the latest data that you input. So just know that you're going to have to, every time you go to leave, if you've added a little more data, you're going to need to go fill in that email again so that you will get the link. Be aware that we typically only ask for selected data points. We did get questions last year of I think you guys didn't ask for everything you need. We did. So if you're wondering if we forgot to ask for certain data points, in all likelihood we did not. And you can check the APR table examples for exactly what cells we're looking for from each table, and then make sure that you're pulling from the right cell, the right row and column. And then make sure you're entering data from the correct table in question, there are a lot of like repetitive ones in there now. So like there's 19A1 and A2, there used to be A3. That one's gone, but like A1 and A2 look pretty much the same. One's just for stayers and one's for leavers, right? And then 13A2, B2, C2. They're the same except who is in them, right? So just make sure when you're in the survey, you're matching up. I'm looking at this APR table, I'm entering it into this survey question, and that they're correct. And the tables that tend to cause the most problems have been, well, in the past it was 19A3, now it's 19A1 and A2. And we'll touch on that in a minute. And then 23C, and I've noted that 13A2, B2, and C2 are more complex now, many more columns. So again, just, you know, stick with it. We're asking for most of that data from those three. So it's a lot of data to look at and to enter. And then also know that I know that Nutmeg issued they had an issue with 13C2. We are in conversation with Jim at Nutmeg about what that was about, and we may end up not looking at the particular table 13C2 this year. So we'll continue to be in conversation about that. So I mentioned 19A1 and A2, and here's just an example. This is what the APR tables examples, the document looks like, where we highlight in red the cells. But what happens a lot is that people want to give us the performance data, which is a percentage, and we're looking for the number. So just be mindful of that, and we don't need the amounts. So again, be mindful about that. And then on 23, this used to be 23A and B, now it's combined into 23C, but it is a really long table. And so we're pulling the subtotal from the permanent destinations, and then we jump to the end. So sometimes that throws people off. And so just be mindful of that as well. On the submission, don't forget to submit on time. The due date is the November 18th at 12 p.m. We say noon because we don't really want to wait around to the very end to find out folks are going to miss the deadline. So again, just be talking to us if you think you have a problem and you need a little more time or want to request more time. If you have a ticket with Nutmeg that you think is going to impact the data, should submit what you have and then let us know. You can use the renewal summary form to flag those kinds of data issues, or and also send us an email. Those things are fine. It just, most importantly, just keep communicating with us to let us know if you're foreseeing an issue that might cause your submission to be late. We're going to open it up to some questions, and I think there is one in there already. And I would say though, if we go through here and you're in the survey and a question comes up, don't be shy. You can email us at the Gmail account and ask for TA, and that is fine. We're monitoring that. I check in multiple times a day to see if anybody needs any assistance. And just let us know that it's TA for renewal project evaluation, and we'll sort of be aware that that's what you're asking for. Yeah, I think we can open it up to if folks have any questions. I think Meredith had a question that Pam responded to. Are there any other questions, or Pam, if there was anything else that you want? So Meredith asked, what do we do if we are a subrecipient and don't have access to ELOC's info? So there was a note in the email that went out, but this is particular to, I think it was for CT0301, but for anybody that pertains to. So one, if you're a subrecipient, you really need to make sure that you are in communication with the recipient. This is outside of CT0301. To clarify who's going to submit the surveys. So many projects have subrecipients. The recipient and the subrecipients should talk to make sure they know who's going to submit everything. And because we really only want one set of data. in cases where you're a subrecipient, you don't have access to stuff, it needs to be submitted. If it's a particular case where you're not in coordination, let us know. And I think we will try to figure out what's the appropriate way to go about that. But in most of those cases, what it's going to be is that the recipient who does have access to that stuff should be doing the submission. If that's not the case, then again, reach out to us through the Gmail account, and we're going to probably need to troubleshoot around that and figure out what's the best way to make sure we get everything we need.
Thanks, Christy.
No problem. Anyone else? Questions? I see a lot of new names, so I'm hoping that everything I've said has been so clear and amazing that you're all just like, get it. Pam, was there anything I missed that you thought should be flagged for this?
No, everything that you said was clear and perfectly understood. No, I think you did a great job.
We've been doing this a while, right? So
you're getting better every single time you present this. I know it's a dry topic.
Honestly. We know it's a little confusing this year, and apologies in advance that we're probably going to ask you to do this and then really quickly turn around and ask you to do some work on the FY20 data quarterly monitoring, but we're just in a weird year, and so we really do. We've been waiting for HUD to give more guidance, but we've reached the point where we just have to move ahead, and then we still need to keep our eyes on the other submissions, and that includes the SPMs. So apologies in advance for that, but again, feel free to reach out if you have questions along the way. We know that it might not be until you get into those surveys and start answering questions that they come up for you. So please do go into the surveys. If you haven't yet, please try to at least look at the Word doc or go into the surveys and look at them and make sure that you really are clear about what you need to put together and submit, and not wait till the last minute. All right, well, if there aren't any other questions, someone asked if the slides would be emailed out. They will, and again, this is being recorded, so anybody who wants to watch again, you can, but we'll also send out to all the folks who weren't able to join. So you all should get this recording in addition, and you'll have the slides. And again, the email that we sent out also has links to the YouTube channel page, the Dropbox folder, and had the other slides as well. So you should have the materials at your within your reach. If you're having any issues, as always, again, can't say it enough, email us, let us know, and we'll work with you to figure it out. Okay.
Thank you, Christy.
Oh, thanks.
And
Thanks everybody
everyone
for joining. Yeah. And hopefully it's a smooth process, and folks, yeah, don't have too many issues filling out the surveys. Okay. I guess we'll wrap it up, and we'll talk to you soon enough. And be on the lookout probably in early December for the project level reports. We'll start putting those together and then sending those out in advance of the December meeting. And then Pam and I will look at our calendars and try to schedule that meeting in advance as well. So thanks, everybody.